all. Today I'm going to be discussing visual representation of dress during the Industrial Revolution era, specifically examining the work of pioneer photographers David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson. The Industrial Revolution, which is generally considered to have taken place between the years 1750 and 1900, is marked by major social and economic changes driven by technological advancement, which led to the development of industry and mass manufacturing. Photographers Hill and Adamson, whose work we will be discussing today, founded the first photography studio in Scotland, and their partnership produced over 3,000 photographs in the 5 years that they worked together between 1843 and 1847. Most of Hill and Adamson's photographs were taken at their photography studio Rock House in Edinburgh, Scotland, where they ran their business shooting portraits of the middle and upper class. The pair is perhaps most well known, though, for their early social documentary-style photography, and their portraits taken of wives of fishermen in the Scottish town of Newhaven. We will be examining and comparing the role of dress in these two series of images, the Rockhouse Studio portraits and the Newhaven Fishwives series, and delving into what these images say about what was happening in the world at this time. The clothing in Hill and Adamson's photography really reflects the duality of the Industrial Revolution period, which was an era marked by negotiation between nostalgia for the stability of the old world and the energy and optimism of industrial progress. In the Newhaven Fishwives series of photographs, the women are shown wearing simple striped aprons, wool petticoats, shawls, and bonnets, clothing that communicates practicality, modesty, and moral order. There's an immediate sense of honest hard work in the photos. Despite these images being considered the first examples of documentary photography, the more you look at these images, the more you'll notice that these photographs don't reflect the real, challenging lives of these poor working women at all. The clothes are clean, the poses are composed, and the scenes are beautifully arranged in an almost painterly fashion. The depiction of these working-class laborers feels more nostalgic and idealized than honest. This romanticization of pre-industrial life was a prevalent theme in culture and society during the Industrial Revolution, a response to a rapidly changing world. In contrast, the Rockhouse Studio portrait shows something very different. The photos capture the growing middle and upper class of Edinburgh, perfectly posed in their finest clothes. In these images, the clothing is all about status. Sitters wear tailored jackets, structured dresses, and lace shawls, garments meant to communicate refinement and success. In the early 1840s, photography was incredibly new. The medium only first began to become used more largely in 1839. And having portraits taken was newly accessible to a much wider range of people. While painted portraits had been primarily reserved for the most wealthy and elite, in the 1840s the newly developed middle class, which had come about as a result of the Industrial Revolution, had the financial means to sit for a photography portrait. For the first time, the working middle class could, quite literally, picture themselves in positions of prestige. Together, these two series of photographs highlight a society and culture divided between tradition and progress. The Newhaven Fishwives photos look backward with nostalgia, and the Rockhouse Studio portraits look forward with ambition. In the early to mid-19th century, the early days of photography, the camera in itself became a sort of cultural marker. Having one's portrait taken, previously reserved for the most elite, became more democratized. This aligned with the movement happening at the time towards self-representation, meaning individuals having more control over how they were viewed, social mobility, and capitalism that came with the Industrial Revolution. The photography portrait was a cultural marker of status, technology, and progress. The photographs of Hill and Adamson were taken during the Romantic era, and prior to joining forces with Adamson and beginning photography, David Hill was a landscape painter. The Newhaven Fishwives series feels aligned with the Romantic era art and painting, specifically with artists like Jean-François Millet, who had a sort of fascination with rural life and the noble laborer. The positioning of the figures in the Newhaven Fishwives series of photographs has been compared to portraits by artists like Rembrandt, and the lighting and poise of the photos has a way of aestheticizing and romanticizing hard manual work and poverty. Both series of Hill and Adamson's photographs are also reflective of Victorian morality and the values of the period. Key values of the Victorian era, which spanned from 1837 to 1901, include moral order, personal improvement, work ethic, and modesty. Examining the photos themselves and the broader context of the era during which they were taken, the subtext of both series of work is really all about idealization and control. The New Haven Fishwives series doesn't present an authentic look at poverty or working life, but instead a sanitized, idealized, longing picture of it. The subjects and images are composed in a way that almost turns them into visual symbols, reassuring images of honesty, tradition, and nostalgia at a time when industrialization was changing almost every aspect of people's lives. There's some irony here to this subtext. Hill and Adamson were using, and their business was profiting off of, one of the newest technologies of the Industrial Revolution, photography, a medium they simultaneously were using to look longingly back at a pre-industrial world. The Rockhouse Studio portraits, on the other hand, are all about self-construction, aspiration, and control. The newly formed middle class that had developed alongside industrialization could afford to sit for photography portraits and, for the first time, shape how they were represented. Dress allowed people to construct an image of themselves that reflected who they wanted to be, their goals and aspirations, not just who they were born as. In both cases, there's a kind of performance happening in Hill and Adamson's photography. Both series of photographs are using clothing and dress to communicate something rooted in, but not quite aligned with reality. These two series of photographs challenge our assumptions as viewers of photography being a medium of truth and reality. While the New Haven Fishwives photographs are often described as the first example of documentary photography, the images actually show a very curated version of life as a laborer. The dress of the photo subjects, while simple and practical for the time period, are much too pristine and polished looking to reflect the true nature of their work. None of the women in these photographs look as if they've been handling and preparing fish for days. The Rockhouse Studio portraits do something similar, but in a more aspirational manner. The dress in these portraits reflect the massive changes to social order that took place during the Industrial Revolution, particularly with the rise of the middle class and the beginning of factory-produced clothing and textiles. Prior to industrialization, differences in class and status were very visually obvious. Identification in society through dress was very clear. The poor wore handmade, simple garments, and the wealthy wore more elaborate and decorative, tailor-made garments. The Industrial Revolution blurred these boundaries, though. The middle class began to be able to afford to dress and to be memorialized through photography portraits like the elite. These images don't necessarily show us the true identity of the subjects, but rather a performative reflection of who they would like to be seen as. All in all, Hill and Adamson's photography perfectly encapsulates the duality, uncertainty, and promise of the Industrial Revolution. In both series of photographs analyzed here, we see dress being used not only as clothing or fashion, but as a visual language used to create both identity and to communicate a message. Messages conveyed in these two series of images are contradictory but follow similar themes, expressing nostalgia and ambition, anxiety and pride, longing for the past, and excitement for the future. The photographs don't really record reality, but they do play a significant active role in how we remember history. The New Haven Fishwives photography series and the Rockhouse Studio portraits are a good reminder for us today that from its very earliest inception, photography has never been purely objective and truthful. It has always been shaped by aesthetics, class perspective, and cultural and social ideology, and this statement is just as relevant to us today.